Want to know how to get the most out of a sim racing rally car? Well, I'm probably not the best person to tell you how, but I am joined here in the studio by someone that is.
It's quite easy to go completely flat out on a straight piece of road, but whenever we come to a corner, especially on a loose surface like gravel, it can be difficult to know how to get around that corner in the fastest way, but also without crashing as well. So on gravel, you want to brake pretty aggressively so that you shift all of the weight onto the front tires and you get grip on turn-in. So you want to brake hard, get the grip on the front tires, turn in, and then immediately back on the throttle once you hit the apex. By braking hard and shifting the weight onto the front wheels, we actually take the grip away from the rear, which helps rotate the car as well. So it's really important to be aware of the weight transfer.
To explain further, weight or load transfer is probably the most fundamental concept to understand to maximize performance. When you make any control inputs on the car, braking, accelerating, steering, etc., the load experienced by the tyres is affected. For example, when you brake, momentum wants the heavy chassis to continue on its path, compressing the front suspension and pushing the front tyres into the ground with more force. And that generates more grip with those tyres, which is obviously a useful thing to have when you want to turn the car into a corner. But when we talk about weight or load transfer, we're really discussing the distribution of load. So in our braking example, while the front tyres experience more load and generate more grip, the rear tyres are subjected to less load and produce less grip. Again, this is helpful on turn-in, as John mentioned, because it helps rotate the car. Intuitively, this is all reversed when you're accelerating, with the rear tyres gaining the benefit of the load transfer. And when you're steering, the distribution of the load moves across the car, loading up the outside tyres. And keep this in mind for a little bit later in the video when John takes you through the Scandinavian Flick. Anyway, back to the expert.
And towards the exit of the corner, whenever you go back on the throttle, the weight transfer is actually reversed. So yeah, it can mean that you get more grip on the rear, which can induce some understeer on the exit. But if you do a good job of shifting the weight on the entry, the car will already be pitched into a slide, and that understeer on the exit shouldn't be much of an issue. We've learned how to shift the weight and pitch the car into a slide on the corner, but how do we keep that going throughout a long corner, such as this perfectly placed donut we have here? Once you get the car sliding and you've broken traction, it's very important to know how to control that slide by increasing and reducing throttle input as you go around the corner. As you can see here, I can go around this donut pretty much just by balancing the throttle. Basically, whenever the car goes a bit too wide, I can come off the throttle, readjust my line, turn in a little bit more, and then get back on the throttle. But yeah, on gravel, the grip is quite low, but then once we go on to tarmac like we have here, you can be a lot more aggressive with the throttle because you've got more traction in general from the surface and the tire contact. So here we're pitching in, go on the throttle, and the car just goes straight because it's got that grip, and the rear wheels are pushing the car forward rather than braking traction like you have on gravel. With rear-wheel drive cars, the throttle management is even more important, because if you put too much throttle input, you will spin the car. So it's a bit more of a balancing act than you have with four-wheel drive. With front-wheel drive, throttle input is really important in the management, because you can get a lot of understeer on mid-corner if you just smash the throttle. So you really have to balance your input just so that you find the traction and you can get out of the corner as quick as possible.
That's the basics covered, but before we get into all of the fun stuff like handbrake turns, Scandi flicks, clutch kicks, and how to avoid death on the jumps, a quick word about game settings.
For me, one of the most important things in a rally game is to have your steering settings set properly. It's quite common that when people are coming from circuit racing games and new players, they have the force feedback settings a little bit too strong, which can be overpowering and makes it difficult, as if you're fighting against the wheel rather than it doing what you expect. I recommend tuning your settings, things like the self-aligned torque and the wheel friction, just so that you have enough detail to feel everything you need to feel from the road, but that you can also have quick hands, which you need in rally driving. You know, you need to be able to turn one way and then the other way without the wheel fighting against that. The assists that we have in all racing games and in Dirt Rally 2 are really good for beginners, but when you're ready to get better as a driver, it's best to try and turn the assists off. The best way to do this is probably turn the settings down for each one gradually until you get more and more comfortable with having them off. Turning the assists off will give you more control over the car to be able to do all of the techniques that you see rally drivers do. The only way you can do those properly is with turning everything in terms of assists off. The handbrake turn is when we pull the handbrake quickly to lose traction at the rear so we can go around very tight corners. So let's take an example. We head towards this hairpin around the pole. It's important to get your braking right, pitch the weight over the front wheels, and then a quick pull of the handbrake. In this case, we've got a button on the steering wheel, so it's a little bit more difficult to see, but we'll do another attempt so you can see it once more. Let's head towards the hairpin. We're braking hard, shift the weight over the front wheels so we get grip, pull the handbrake, off the brakes, on the throttle, and out of the corner. From the outside, a handbrake turn looks relatively simple, but you have to do everything in a very quick sequence to get it right. And that begins with getting your braking right, so you pitch the weight onto the front wheels and you get that grip on the front wheels for turning, and then pull the handbrake whilst the weight is on the front tyres. This means that the rear will lose traction and swing around, almost like it's spinning around a point. And then you need to get off the brake and on the throttle. So we'll do one more example. And it's always good to maybe do a slight Scandinavian flick. So turn one way, braking, then turn in, pull the handbrake whilst you turn in and on the throttle again. And you see it's actually difficult to talk over everything I'm doing there because it does happen so fast, and you just need to learn the process and then practice, and then you'll get quicker at doing every stage of it. It's also a good technique to shift more weight and get more of a slide on the entry, to do a technique called the Scandinavian Flick, where you turn slightly in the opposite way on the corner entry just to shift a bit more weight, and you get more of a reaction from the car and more oversteer as a result. So here we'll brake hard, and whilst we're braking, turn one way, then the other way, and we get this pendulum effect where the weight moves from one side of the car to the other, and then you get more of a loss of grip basically on the outside tyres. In some scenarios, the engine revs can dip down really low, such as square corners or hairpins, and this can actually lose you quite a lot of time. But one way to counteract this is to have a quick clutch kick, just to bump the revs of the car back up again so that the car starts to accelerate a bit more aggressively. So if we take an example, we're going to go around this pole and do a handbrake turn in second gear. The revs are down really low, and you can see there was a lag. Basically the revs dropped down too low. So if we go into the same hairpin again in second gear, pull the handbrake, the revs go down, but we can kick the clutch, and it really helped the car build up those revs again and accelerate a lot quicker. In most scenarios, jumps aren't really anything to be scared of. They can be a problem whenever you have a jump into a corner, or when you've got multiple jumps together where the car is landing from one jump and it's compressing the suspension and rebounding, and then you're hitting another jump. So it's almost like this pogo effect where the car can take you by surprise and maybe react how you weren't expecting. So in those scenarios where it's a double jump, you might want to be a little bit more cautious, a bit more on the brake, just so you steady the car. But if it's a single jump up a long straight, you can pretty much keep it completely flat on the throttle, but you'll want to make sure your steering is really straight on the landing. In this example, we've got a jump leading into a corner, so it means we'll have to brake before the jump. So brake a little bit, then back on the power, and then around the corner. If you brake and then go back on the throttle just before takeoff, that usually means that the weight is transferred over the rear wheels, and it will keep the front more level than what it would if you were braking on the entry to the jump, so that's also a good tip.
Keeping level sounds like good life advice to me. And if you want to learn more from John's vast wealth of sim and rally driving experience, then check out the Team Fordzilla Instagram and the playlist of our WRC videos here on my channel. Links are, of course, in the description.